There are moments in history when an entire nation suddenly realizes it has been living in a matrix. Not a technological matrix like in the movies, but a psychological one, believing they could do nothing for themselves. On September 30th, 2022, 20 million Burkina people woke up, and when a nation awakens, nothing can stop it. Ibrahim Traoré, 34, is not just a young military officer who seized power through a coup. He is a philosopher of action, an architect of consciousness, a catalyst of transformation. When he stepped up to lead, no one expected that from this small country a revolutionary flame would ignite, shaking the entire world system. The world had underestimated Burkina Faso for too long. They thought it was just a small, insignificant nation in the heart of Africa. They never imagined that from this land a completely new development model would emerge, a revolutionary approach to self-reliance. To understand why what is happening in Burkina Faso is so revolutionary, we must first understand the machine that has operated for decades to keep Africa in a state of dependency. This is not just an economic system, but a complex psychological system designed to convince an entire continent that it cannot stand on its own. The pillars of control. Psychological control is the first step. For decades, Africa has been bombarded with the message that it cannot feed itself, that it needs aid, foreign experts, and technology from the outside. This message was repeated until it became a self-evident truth in the minds of the people. In Burkina Faso, before Ibrahim Traoré, the phrase, "we cannot live without them," had become a national mantra. Economic control is subtly designed. The system operates on a simple principle. Africa produces raw materials at low prices, exports them abroad, and then re-imports processed products at prices many times higher. Burkina Faso exported cotton for $2 a kilogram, but had to import cotton shirts for $50 each. They have fertile alluvial soil, but still have to import food. They have gold in the ground, but no capacity to process it into jewelry. Intellectual control operates through the brain drain. The best students are encouraged to study abroad and then either stay there or return with a Western mindset. The domestic education system is designed to create consumers of foreign products, not creators of local solutions. Traditional knowledge is looked down upon, labeled as backward, compared to modern knowledge from the West. Cultural control is perhaps the most sophisticated. Through films, music, fashion, and media, Africa is convinced that everything from the outside is better than anything local. Local languages are considered uncivilized. Local food is not modern, and traditional medicine is superstition. Gradually, Africans began to be ashamed of their own culture. In Burkina Faso, before Ibrahim Traoré came to power, all these control mechanisms worked perfectly. The country depended on foreign aid for 40% of its national budget. 70% of its food was imported despite having 13 million hectares of arable land. Over 60% of the population worked in agriculture, yet the country could not feed itself. The collective psychology of "we cannot live without them" was deeply ingrained in the national subconscious. Government agencies were profoundly affected by the donor mindset. Ministers spent more time writing aid proposals than planning for their own development. Policies were designed to please international donors rather than serve the real needs of the people. Success was measured by how much aid was received, not by how much value was created. But there are moments in history when all these layers of deception are stripped away, when a people sees the truth of its own power. For Burkina Faso, that moment came when Ibrahim Traoré and his young colleagues realized that their country was slowly dying, not from a lack of resources, but from a lack of confidence, not from a lack of ability, but from being convinced they had no ability. The philosopher of action. And at the center of this awakening is a man who has long understood that real power comes not from the outside, but from within. Not from what you receive, but from what you create. Ibrahim Traoré is not just a leader. He is a philosopher of action, an architect of consciousness, a catalyst of transformation. To understand him, we must understand the philosophy he represents. His core belief is simple, yet revolutionary. Every nation has within it everything it needs to prosper. This is not an empty slogan, but a principle of action. He believes that dependency is not the result of poverty, but poverty is the result of dependency. When a people believes it needs others to survive, it stops developing the capabilities needed to be self-sufficient. They become passive recipients instead of active creators. He understands that to change circumstances, you must first change consciousness. Ibrahim Traoré's philosophy is not isolationism. He is not against international cooperation, but he insists that cooperation must take place between equal partners, not between master and slave, between donor and recipient. He says, "We want trade, not aid. We want partnership, not paternalism. We want respect, not pity." He connects his philosophy to Thomas Sankara, the legendary leader of Burkina Faso from the 1980s. Sankara once said, "He who feeds you controls you." Ibrahim Traoré understands that true freedom comes from controlling your own destiny, creating your own solutions, and defining your own success. But what makes Ibrahim Traoré special is not just his philosophy, but his ability to translate abstract ideas into concrete actions. He has a clear methodology for transformation. The first stage is consciousness raising. He began by changing the narrative about Burkina Faso's capabilities. Instead of talking about what the country lacked, he talked about what the country had. Instead of focusing on problems, he focused on potentials. He connected with cultural pride and historical memory, creating new symbols and a new language of possibility. Instead of saying, "we can't," he encouraged, "we will find a way." The second stage is institutional transformation. He restructured the government to serve the people, not donors. Ministries were realigned to focus on production support instead of aid coordination. The budget was redistributed from prestige projects to productive infrastructure. The third stage is the economic revolution. The focus shifted from consumption to production capabilities. Instead of just importing products, Burkina Faso began to develop local value chains. Policies were established to keep wealth circulating within the country instead of flowing abroad. The fourth stage is a cultural renaissance. He revived traditional knowledge systems, not as museum pieces, but as living, breathing solutions for modern problems. He blended ancient wisdom with modern techniques, creating a new identity for Burkina Faso, not as recipients of charity, but as producers and innovators. The movement ignites. But a revolution is never just about one person. It's about the moment when one person's consciousness spreads and becomes the consciousness of many. In Burkina Faso, this spread occurred with astonishing speed and scale. Initially, there was skepticism. The people had heard too many promises from previous leaders. When Ibrahim Traoré spoke of self-reliance and transformation, many thought it was just another political rhetoric. But something was different this time. He didn't just talk, he acted. The first believers were farmers and young people. Farmers, because they are closest to the land and understand its potential. Young people, because they had less invested in the old system and were more open to new possibilities. When they saw concrete actions, government support for local production, investment in agricultural infrastructure, respect for traditional knowledge, they began to believe. The tipping point came when the first results began to appear. when the first farmers harvested successful crops using traditional seeds and modern techniques, when the first local businesses started profitable operations. Skepticism began to turn into cautious optimism, then into genuine belief. Mass conversion occurred when the majority of the population bought into the vision. Suddenly, everywhere you looked, you saw evidence of a transformed consciousness. In the agricultural sector, farmers began experimenting with traditional seeds they had abandoned for imported varieties, forming cooperatives to share knowledge. In the education sector, teachers began incorporating local knowledge into the curriculum. In the economic sector, entrepreneurs started looking for local solutions instead of depending on foreign partnerships. But a revolution is not just about changing hearts and minds. It's also about changing systems and structures. Ibrahim Traoré systematically restructured the government to support the new vision. Economic policies experienced a complete revolution, with import substitution policies implemented and support for local industries prioritized. Cultural policies were transformed, with official recognition given to traditional knowledge systems and local languages integrated into official communication. Global ripples and lasting impact. A true revolution does not respect borders. The ideas of Ibrahim Traoré and the success of Burkina Faso began to resonate across Africa and beyond. Leaders from other African countries started to study the model. Youth movements across the continent adopted similar philosophies. A Pan-African consciousness was revived with practical applications. Global attention shifted from dismissive to curious to admiring. International development organizations were forced to reconsider their approaches. Perhaps most importantly, Ibrahim Traoré contributed to an intellectual revolution, a new development theory based on endogenous capabilities rather than external assistance. But a revolution is truly measured by the transformation it creates in the lives of ordinary people. Psychological transformation. The default thinking shifted from, "We need someone to help us," to, "We can solve this problem ourselves." From scarcity to abundance. The dominant thinking shifted from, "There aren't enough resources," to, "We have everything we need, we just need to organize it properly." From individual to collective thinking, the survival mentality of, "I have to look out for myself," evolved into an understanding that we succeed or fail together. Amadou, a 45-year-old farmer, exemplifies this. "I used to grow just to get by. Now I grow to feed my community with a surplus to sell. I use traditional seeds our ancestors perfected. The difference wasn't the land or the seeds, but the mindset. I realized I could be a producer, not just a survivor." Fatimata, a 38-year-old teacher, shares a similar story. "My students used to dream of escaping Burkina Faso. Now my students dream of building Burkina Faso. Success for them is contributing to national development." Burema, a 29-year-old entrepreneur, represents the new generation. "I used to think that to be successful, I needed foreign partners. Now I realize that real success comes from building something the community owns and controls. Profit is not just about money, but about dignity." When individual transformation occurs at scale, it creates societal transformation. Burkina Faso is experiencing fundamental shifts at every level. The economic ecosystem has been restructured. Social structures have strengthened. A cultural renaissance is visible everywhere. Institutional evolution supports the transformation, with the government becoming more responsive to its citizens, and the education system becoming more relevant to local needs. These changes are reflected in national indicators: food security shifting from import dependence to export capability, employment increasing, and the trade balance improving. But perhaps the most important changes are those that cannot be measured by statistics. a national confidence replacing a national inferiority complex, and a creative energy surging as people feel empowered to innovate. The universal lesson. The Burkina Faso revolution is creating ripples across the world. It is inspiring a continental awakening in Afrika, providing global South inspiration, sparking an academic revolution in development studies, and forcing a media transformation in how Africa's story is told. The revolution's true measure is its impact on future generations. Children growing up in Burkina Faso today will have a completely different worldview from their parents, grounded in a culture of creativity and self-reliance. Ibrahim Traoré and the Burkinabe Revolution teach us universal principles: the power of belief, the importance of self-reliance, the value of a cultural foundation, and the necessity of courage. Watching Burkina Faso transform raises a question. What revolution is possible in your own life, your own community, your own nation? What false limitations have you accepted? What local problems could be solved with local resources? Ibrahim Traoré has shown us that a revolution doesn't require violence, only a clear vision of what's possible, a commitment to practical action, and a belief in people's capabilities. Burkina Faso has proven that transformation is possible. They have done this not by receiving more aid, but by believing in their own power. The question remains, who will be next? Which community, which country, which individual will embrace this revolutionary mindset and create their own transformation? The revolution is waiting. The question is, are you ready to join it? Your answer will determine not only your future, but the future of all the people whose lives you could touch and inspire. A revolution is not just about changing systems. It's about changing consciousness. And consciousness, once changed, changes everything else.